Due to many requests, I have left the transcription of the video in French. Noah, the man who defied an entire generation with his unwavering faith, is known as the survivor of a world in ruins. But have you ever wondered how his life ended after the EOS flood retreated and humanity resumed its course? This patriarch, who was once the last righteous man of his generation, lived a silent end of life marked by little explored challenges. His death symbolizes the end of an era and invites us to reflect on the weight of a legacy that influenced nations and centuries. Noah's life, often reduced to the construction of the ark and the flood, hides fascinating details about these last years and the lasting impact of his actions. What happened to his descendants? How the blessing he pronounced shaped the future of peoples? And why his story continues to resonate in each of us today. It is not just a historical story, but a journey of redemption, choices, and promises that still has much to teach us. Get ready to dive into a story that goes beyond the flood and reveals the nuances of a man who, despite his flaws, was used by God to transform the destiny of humanity. If this content inspires you, don't forget to click like and tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. Let's go. Noah lived in a world where corruption was not only visible, but completely rampant. The story of Genesis 6 verses 5-7 paints a striking picture of the eternal life in which man's wickedness was great on earth, and every thought of his heart was directed every day only toward evil. In the midst of this chaos, God looked at Noah and saw something different. He was a just and honest man among his contemporaries. Noah walked with God. Genesis 69. This description says a lot about who he was, a man who resisted conformity and lived the truth even if it meant going against the tide. Think of the difficulty of swimming against a powerful tide. Imagine living in a society where moral values are despised, where justice is ignored, and where violence is omnipresent. This sounds familiar to you, doesn't it? Even today we face similar challenges. Noah shows us that it is possible to remain steadfast even though you are a minority. His secret was in his connection with God. Have you ever thought about how you can cultivate this connection in your own life, perhaps through daily prayer, reading the scriptures, or actions that reflect your values? When God called Noah to build the ark, he did so in the midst of a generation that scoffed at the idea. Imagine what he had to endure: the provocations, the disbelief, the rejection. Yet Noah faithfully followed every divine instruction. He teaches us the power of obedience, even when it seems foolish to men. How often do we find ourselves faced with choices that seem absurd to those around us? But like Noah, we must remember that obeying God is always the wisest decision. Even though it may be difficult at times, building the ark was not only an act of obedience, but also an act of perseverance. It was not a task accomplished in a few days. It is estimated that it took Noah several decades to complete this monumental work. How many times did he have to ask questions? How many times did he feel the weight of loneliness? Yet he persevered. This perseverance is a valuable lesson. For us, what you are building in your life today that requires patience and determination may be a professional dream, a relationship, or even your own faith. It is interesting to note that God did not choose Noah for his perfection, but for his willingness to listen and act. This reminds us that God is not looking for impeccable people, but hearts willing. You might think that your failures disqualify you, but the story of Noah proves otherwise. Using those who are ready to walk with him, even if they don't understand everything right away, is an invitation to think about how you can be more available to divine plans in your life. Another fascinating aspect of the story of Noah is that his righteousness brought salvation to his family. In a doomed world, God extended his mercy to Noah's household. This reminds us that our choices affect not only us, but also those around us. Just as Noah protected his family, you too can be a channel of blessing and protection for yourselves. Your actions, your example, and your faith have the power to impact generations. As the construction of the ark progressed and the divine calling was implemented, Noah was about to see God's plan come to fruition. Noticing how he faced the challenge of trusting fully when the signs of the flood had not yet appeared leads us to look at the next turning point in his story: the flood and God's covenant with him. In both the literal and spiritual sense, when the U.S. began to emerge, it was not only the earth that was covered, but also the sins and corruption of humanity. God gave Noah precise instructions to build the ark, and when the rain began, this immense boat became the refuge of creation. Genesis 7 verses 11 to 12 tells us that all the springs of the great deep gushed forth, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth. For 40 days and 40 nights in the ark, Noah not only survived but also took care of the future. Every animal, every bird, every living being represented the continuity of creation. It was a monumental task. Nurturing, protecting, and caring for so many creatures was not an easy thing. This reminds us that we are often called to protect what is precious even in the midst of life storms. Perhaps you are going through a flood, a time of chaos and uncertainty. Remember that everything, like the ark, symbolizes God's protection and also offers refuge in difficult times. After 150 days, when the waters overwhelmed the earth, the first signs of dry land appeared. The ark landed on Mount Ararat, and little by little, the United Arab Emirates began to descend. During this period of waiting, Noah showed patience and faith. He sent a raven and then a dove, and finally received proof that the earth was dry when the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak. Genesis 81. This leaf was not just a sign of earth, but a promise of renewal. Have you ever known times when small signs brought great hope, perhaps a gesture of kindness, a door opening, or an answered prayer? When Noah finally left the ark, his first thought was not to build a house or start the harvest. His priority was to build a hotel for the eternal and offer sacrifices. This gesture is deeply meaningful. Above all, he recognized the sovereignty of God and thanked for the salvation received. This teaches us the importance of gratitude and ordering our priorities, how we can put God first in our lives, especially after overcoming great challenges. It can be through simple gestures like dedicating the beginning of your day to prayer or giving thanks for each blessing received. It is at this moment that God establishes a covenant with Noah and all creation. He promised never again to destroy the earth by a flood. The rainbow described in Genesis 9:13-16 became the symbol of this covenant. I placed my bow only in the cloud, and it will serve as a sign of covenant between me and the earth. It is fascinating to see how something as natural as a rainbow can convey such a profound message. This arch is a reminder that even in the midst of divine justice, there is grace. Have you ever stopped to notice how God constantly reminds us of his promises? Whether through nature, the people around us, or the scriptures, he constantly reaffirms his love and faithfulness. The ark and the covenant are not just an ancient story, but a reflection of the relationship between God and humanity. The ark was the means by which God preserved creation, and the covenant was the guarantee that destruction would not be the final chapter. It invites us to examine our lives and recognize the covenants that God made with us, promises of protection, provision, and presence. How can we live to honor these promises? Thus, the end of the flood marks not only the regeneration of the earth, but also the beginning of a new adventure for Noah and his family. The promise made to Noah did not come alone. It was accompanied by a responsibility. God sets guidelines for this new world, including respect for human life. In Genesis 96, it is written, "If anyone sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed," because God made man in his own image. This commandment underscores the sacredness of life, a fundamental principle that remains essential today as we value the life that God has given us, whether it is our own or that of others around us. God entrusted Noah and his family with the mission of being fruitful and multiplying to fill the earth in this time. The injunction was not only a call to have descendants, but an invitation to rebuild and lay the foundations of a new civilization based on divine principles. We too are often called to start over in our careers, in our relationships, or in our faith. Have you ever thought about it? You could start over in your life by trusting in divine guidance. God reminded Noah that he remained sovereign over all creation despite the upheavals and challenges. God remains in control, guiding humanity with a perfect plan. This truth brings us comfort and hope in the face of life's uncertainties. What would it change in your life to fully trust in this sovereignty, even when the contrary winds seem to want to push you away? God's covenant with Noah is a powerful reminder of his undeserved grace. Noah was not perfect, But God chose to use him as a channel of restoration. This same grace is available to us today. God continues to offer promises of hope, love, and renewal to all who turn to him. What divine promise you can take advantage of today to strengthen your journey with this promise engraved in your hearts and a new world before you. Noah and his family were ready to take the first steps towards a new reality. But how did they face the difficulties and challenges of this new beginning? What happened when the weight of humanity once again rested on the shoulders of one man? These questions invite us to explore Noah's life after the flood and the lessons it still teaches us today. After the flood, Noah and his family faced the challenge of rebuilding civilization from scratch. The earth was devastated, and all that was left came from the ark. In Genesis 9:20, we see Noah beginning a new cycle of life as a farmer, planting a vineyard. This moment symbolizes a new beginning and opportunity for humanity to follow a different path based on the covenant that God established. It reminds us that even in the midst of destruction, God always offers a chance to start over. Imagine the responsibility that weighed on the shoulders of Noah and his sons. He not only had to repopulate the earth, but also establish new principles of life. From this small group, all of humanity would be rebuilt. This teaches us the importance of our daily choices. Just like Noah, we are called to be solid foundations for those who come after us. How are you helping to build a legacy that inspires future generations? Noah planted vineyards, cultivated the land, and led a normal life after the extraordinary event that transformed his history. It is fascinating to see how the simplicity of this task contrasts with the greatness of the flood. This shows us that if God sometimes calls us to fulfill great missions, he also teaches us to value daily tasks. Noah's relationship with God with his sons Shem, Cham, and Japheth plays a crucial role in this new phase. Although few details are given about his daily life, it is obvious that his family bond was a pillar of this reconstruction that reminds us how essential family relationships are in times of renewal. However, even Noah, a righteous man, remained human and fallible. Genesis 9:20 relates an incident where Noah, after producing wine from his vineyard, got drunk, showing that even the most faithful can go through moments of weakness. The episode of drunkenness, a lesson about the human condition. In his new life as a farmer, Noah planted a vineyard, and one day got drunk with the wine he had produced. This made him vulnerable. He found himself naked in his tent. Genesis 9:20-21. This seemingly banal event reveals a lot about human nature. Even a man who walked with God can succumb to weaknesses. We learn here that no one is immune to mistakes, and that even the most honest can suffer the consequences of their choice. Cham, one of Noah's sons, saw their father's nakedness and reacted in a disrespectful going to tell her brothers what she had seen. Genesis 9:22. This attitude reflected a lack of honor and consideration, contrasting with the values of respect and protection expected at this time, reminding us that our actions, even the most insignificant ones, can have considerable repercussions. Have you ever thought about the impact that small attitudes can have on your relationships? Japheth showed respect by covering his father without looking at his nakedness. They took a coat, walked backwards, and covered him. Genesis 9:23. This gesture illustrates the importance of respect and empathy even in the face of the vulnerability of others. When Noah woke up from his drunkenness and learned what had happened, he pronounced a curse on Canaan, son of Ham, declaring that he would be a slave to the slaves of his brothers. Genesis 9:25-27. This act may seem harsh, but it reflects the seriousness of Ham's lack of respect and its implications for future generations. This episode leads us to reflect on what seed we have in our families of blessings or curses. The contrast between Ham's attitude and that of Shem and Japheth emphasizes the importance of acting with honor even when no one is watching. Shem and Japheth could have ignored the situation, but they chose to do what was right. In a world where contempt and casualness seem normalized, we are called to live with integrity and respect. What examples of respect, peace, and honor do you set for those around you? This episode also reveals the need to remain vigilant on a spiritual level. Noah, although a righteous man, let his guard down and suffered the consequences, reminds us that the Christian life does not require perfection, but constant attention. It is about recognizing our moments of weakness and seeking strength from God to overcome them. Although this incident had serious consequences, It also paved the way for important revelations about the lineages of Shem, Cham, and Japheth. The curse of Canaan became a historical landmark, especially in the relationship between the Canaanites and the Israelites. The descendants of Canaan founded cities and cultures known for practices contrary to divine commandments. On several occasions in biblical history, the Israelites owed debts to the Canaanites, whether on the battlefield or in spiritual conflicts. It teaches us a fundamental truth. Our current decisions can create challenges for future generations, whether individual or collective. Have you ever thought about the impact that your choices today could have on those who come after you? It is also important to note that the curse of Canaan highlighted God's plan to create a holy people, the Canaanites, symbolizing corruption and estrangement. God's curses became a stark contrast to the people of Israel, who were called to be an example of obedience and faithfulness. This reminds us that even in the midst of curses, God remains sovereign, guiding all according to his perfect design in opposition to. Curse of Canaan. The blessing of Shem and Japheth reflects a path of honor and faithfulness. Noah blesses Shem, declaring, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," Genesis 9:26, and prophesied the prosperity of Japheth, saying he would dwell in the tents of Shem. This division of destinies shows that God honors those who choose obedience and respect. We live in a way that attracts blessings from God, or we move away from him finally. This episode highlights the power of fathers as the patriarch Noah had spiritual authority, and these words had a lasting impact that leads us to reflect on the use we make of our own words, especially to those close to us. We proclaim blessings or curses. Our words have the power to build or destroy. How can you use your words to encourage, build, and manifest the love of God? As the biblical story unfolds, we see the effects of this curse and blessing manifest. The descendants of Canaan faced severe judgments, while the lineages of Shem and Japheth prospered. However, the grace of God was never absent. Even among the Canaanites, we see examples of individuals who found redemption, such as Rahab, who became a member of the lineage of Jesus. This reminds us that no matter our origin or our background, God offers opportunities for redemption. The Bible describes Ham as one of the sons of Noah, and his lineage is often associated with Africans, in particular through his children and grandchildren. Among the descendants of Cham, we find four notable sons: Comus, Phut, and Canaan. His children and their subsequent descendants played an important role in the formation of the different peoples we know today, including the African peoples. His son Mizrai is commonly identified and associated with the ancient Egyptian people. His name is often interpreted as two lands or two countries, which may reflect the geographical duality of Egypt with its regions of Upper and Lower Egypt, but is not directly linked to the physical characteristics beyond Egypt. Mizraim is often linked to other regions of North Africa. The influence of Mizraim extends not only geographically but also culturally, contributing to the rich traditions and civilizations that are developed along the banks of the Nile. His descendants helped to form one of the most notable figures in the history of ancient Egypt. Egyptian culture had a lasting impact not only on its region but also on interactions with other civilizations over time. On the other hand, the Phut is associated with certain African regions, but its exact identification is less clear. Some researchers suggest that the Phut could be linked to the inhabitants of the Horn of Africa. However, biblical references to the intelligentsia are less detailed than those of other lineages. His son Canaan, although frequently mentioned in the Bible, is not considered an ancestor of the African people but rather of the Canaanites who inhabited the Middle East. Here it is appropriate to make some important reservations. First, it is crucial to emphasize that the curse was not directed against Cham, the father of Canaan, but against Canaan, the grandson of Noah. The second point is that at this stage of the video, I already deserve your like and your subscription to the channel. This will motivate us to bring more quality content. The third and most important point is that the curse of Canaan is often misinterpreted and associated with the Torah. For the African people, it is worth mentioning that Noah pronounced a curse on Canaan, saying he would be a servant to his brothers. This specific curse was directed against Canaan and not against all African peoples. Canaan was a descendant of Cham, but the curse did not extend to all descendants of Cham, much less to all African peoples. This misinterpretation has led to historical misunderstandings, such as the justification of slavery based on false claims of divine curses. It is essential to debunk this distorted interpretation by recognizing that the curse on Canaan was a specific punishment for him and not a condemnation for an entire region or continent. Does not support the idea that the curse on Canaan justifies discriminatory treatment or inferiority of any ethnic group. The correct interpretation must be based on an understanding of the cultural and historical context of the biblical account, avoiding generalizations. Unfair to Africans or any other ethnic group. Continuing the story, we have Shem, the son blessed by Noah, who became the central character in the continuity of the divine design for humanity. Shem's lineage will be marked by the presence of God, culminating in the call of Abraham and later the emergence of Israel as a nation.
Shem
represents the continuity of an alliance that aims to redeem the world. Shem's genealogy described in Genesis 10 verse 21 to 31 reveals names that reason in the scripture such as Heber, from whom the Hebrews descend. This lineage reminds us that God works with determination through the generations. When we look at our own families, one might ask what value we transmit. Just as Shem was the bearer of a spiritual inheritance, we are called to be the guardians of the inheritance that God entrusted to us. Shem received the promise that his descendants would be God's chosen people, a channel of blessing for all nations. This promise culminates with Abraham, the patriarch of faith who received the divine order. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Genesis 123. The direct link between Shem and Abraham show us that God never acts at random. Each lineage, each name has a role in the great divine plan. This challenges us to think about the role we can play in God's plans for our generation. Another fascinating point is that Shem's blessing was not only material but spiritual, while other lineages sought territorial expansion or power. The lineage of Shem was characterized by a search for the presence of God. It is a powerful reminder that true wealth lies in communion with the Creator. Although Shem is less mentioned in historical events, his importance is unquestionable. He is the root from which emerge the patriarchs, the prophet, and, finally, the Messiah. This shows us that we do not always need to be public figures or be in the spotlight to play a significant role in God's plan. The lineage of Shem not only preserved the faith, but also kept alive the promise of redemption that would come through Jesus Christ. Japheth, another son of Noah, received a blessing that highlighted his territorial expansion and prosperity. In Genesis 9:27, Noah states that God enlarges Japheth and that he dwells in the tents of Shem. This prophecy indicated not only physical growth, but also suggested a future relationship between the line of Japheth and the spiritual blessing of Shem. Japheth's descendants spreading throughout the northern and western regions, becoming the ancestors of many pagan peoples known in antiquity. The genealogy of Japhet listed in Genesis 10 verses 2 to 5 includes names such as Gom, Javan, and Machik, ancestors of settled nations throughout Europe and Asia Minor. These populations are settled in vast territories and developed rich and varied cultures. It is fascinating to see the commentary on the blessing of Japhet that manifests itself in the expansion of his descendants. It reminds us that God's promises are not limited to the individual but can extend to our families and communities, reaching places we would never have imagined. Inhabited in the storms of Shem, the promise of deep spirituality. The phrase inhabited in the tents of EMS has a deep spiritual meaning. This suggests that although the descendants of Japheth prospered materially, their true fulfillment would be from their spiritual connection to the lineage of S. This prophecy finds its culmination in Jesus Christ when the Gentiles, the descendants of Japheth, are integrated into the family of faith. Paul illustrates this integration in Romans 11 verse 17 by describing the Gentiles as a wild olive branch grafted into the natural olive tree. This reminds us that God's grace transcends ethnic and cultural boundaries. The people of Japheth have played a central role in biblical and secular history. Groups such as the Greeks, Romans, and others identified as descendants of Japheth have contributed to great cultural and intellectual advancements, but these material achievements have been accompanied by spiritual challenges. invites us to reflect on our own lives, how we balance material prosperity and spiritual growth. We use the gifts and opportunities that God has entrusted to us for His glory. The interdependence between Japheth and Sem, an image of the divine plan. The relationship between Japheth and Sem highlights the interdependence of peoples in the divine plan. Japheth symbolizes expansion and conquest, without, however, representing the bond with God. Their prophetic union suggests that God's plan is complete when different gifts and functions complement each other. In the later years of Noah, a time of perseverance and accommodation. The last chapter of Noah's life, described in Genesis 9 verse 28 to 29, reports that he lived 350 years after the flood, reaching 950 years. Noah, who now ends up destroying and restoring the world, spent this period observing his children and grandchildren after a new civilization. He saw the fulfillment of God's promise with the earth repopulate and the generations multiplying in parallel. Noah remained a figure of guidance. He will probably do so in the face of his deficits, because I manage the emerging conflicts among his descendants. This reminds us that the role of a patriarch does not end after a great event. It continues through the example and advice he gives to future generations. Noah is an example of perseverance to the end. Not only did he survive the flood, but he lived to see God's promises come true long ago, and the way God supports those who remain faithful to Him despite their mistakes. Noah is remembered in the Bible as a righteous and upstanding man. This demonstrates that a person's true legacy is not defined by their failures, but by how they respond to God's call. You may have gone through difficult times or made mistakes, but like Noah, there is always time to live a life that inspires and honors God, an ultimate achiever of simplicity and faithfulness. A striking aspect of Noah's story is very simple, and the story ends there. There is no great celebration or highlighting, only one mention of his death and the years he lived. This teaches us that the greatness of a life is not in the acclaim, but in the faithful fulfillment of the mission that God entrusts to us. Our apocryphal texts offer complementary stories to the story of Noah, expanding on what is linked to the canonical Genesis. Among the most notable figures, the apocryphal Genesis found among the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Enoch, which offers a richer and sometimes symbolic insight into Noah's life. These detailed accounts concern his journey, as they involve the spirit of his article component placement as he restores humanity or dilutes it. In the Genesis Apocrypha, for example, Noah is portrayed as a chosen character from his birth, carrying almost superhuman characteristics. He is described as a divine radiance, indicating his purity and his connection with God. This text also details the moments following the delusion, since the sacrifice that Noah made took place inside the ark, which differs from the traditional relationship in which the hotel was built outside. This change suggests a deeper symbolism in the arch as a sacred place. The Book of Enoch, kissed by Noah, although it is Noah as a second character, mentions intriguing aspects of his lineage. This text describes how our fallen angels who corrupted the earth before the delusion tried to interfere with the purity of human offspring. Noah was presented as a response to divine corruption, a healing figure against the force of. Furthermore, the text suggests that Noah had prophetic visions about the future of humanity and his descendants, thus expanding his role as a prophet beyond that of a patriarch. In certain traditions associated with the Book of Jubilees, other apocryphal texts, we find more developed mentions about the division of the earth between our children and Noah and the covenants established between God and humanity. This file is received by a specific site, is received in the Middle East terrain, Japheth towards the north and Western Europe and Asia Minor, and camouflage as a region of South Africa. This partition was presented as a solemn decision reinforced by oaths to avoid future disputes between descendants. No. The text also addresses the conflicts that arise in relation to the established borders, emphasizing the importance of obedience to divine instruction. This text also suggests that Noah conveys specific messages to his children as a divine deity and the importance of speaking to God even after exploring the biblical canon regarding Noah's death. Our apocryphal texts do not present specific details in his falsehood, but we suggest that it was a peaceful death after which his divine mission was fulfilled. The main story is his only legacy, and it is how his words and stories shape a future history. These text messages are numerous messages that impact his lineage, including the direct link between the people of Israel and the patriarchs of Israel. Apocryphal narrative essays enrich the story of Noah, presenting him not only as the resurrector of the flood, but also as a central figure in a larger spiritual battle and as a model of purity and obedience to God. The three lines of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth played distinct roles in biblical and world history. The descendants of Shem were directly linked to the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, culminating in the coming of Jesus Christ. Ham, on the other hand, was associated with nations often faced with judgment such as the Canaanites. The descendants of Japheth spread throughout the lands of the north and the west, represents the expansion of humanity beyond the confines of the ancient Middle East. These differences show how God works through each lineage in unique ways. The impact of Noah's lineage is also evident in the way God continued to work through the generations. From the multiplication of humanity to the call of Abraham, we see the promises made to Noah unfold. Each step reflects God's faithfulness in fulfilling his words. This faithfulness encourages us to trust in God's promises to ourselves, knowing that he is able to transform any situation into a greater purpose. With the end of Noah's lineage, an era ends. But an era opens full of possibilities and challenges. And now when you look at the story of Noah and the impact of Saline, what does this awaken in you? Noah was not just a righteous man, he was an instrument of God to transform the destiny of humanity. His obedience shaped generations, and your life challenges us to think about what we are building today. How you are leaving your mark. Are your choices contributing to a legacy that honors God and inspires those who come after? If there is one thing Noah teaches us, it is that God can use even the most ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary plans. What action can you take to align your life with divine design? Maybe it is time to let go of what separates you from God, to embrace faith more intensely, or act courageously in a calling that seems impossible. No matter what happens or your journey, know that it can have a much greater impact than you imagine. Don't just think about that. Put into practice what you learned today. Evaluate your actions, strengthen your faith, and seek to live in a way that inspires others. And if this story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There is still much to be said about the great characters of the Bible and the life-changing lessons. Join us, take us on this journey. Thank you for watching. Hug and stay with God.